Have you ever felt invisible? Like you're standing right there, but no one truly sees you? Tonight's story will stay with you long after the last word is spoken. Before we start, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from tonight. Your city, your country, wherever you are in the world. We love seeing our community spread across the globe. Now, let's begin. The morning sun had barely crested the hills of Sussex when Catherine Hartfield settled into the chair behind her uncle's mahogany desk, a cup of tea cooling at her elbow and a thick ledger spread open before her. The estate office smelled of leather and old paper, of ink and the faint mustiness that clung to buildings that had stood for 2 centuries. It was her favourite room in all of Hartfield Manor. She had been awake since 5, as was her habit, reviewing the quarterly accounts and comparing grain prices from 3 neighbouring estates. There was an opportunity here, she was certain of it. If she could convince Mr. Pemberton at Ashwood and Colonel Morrison at Fairfield to purchase their winter grain collectively, they could negotiate better rates and save everyone money. It would require coordination, trust, and careful planning. But Catherine had never shied away from complicated problems. Her pen scratched across the paper as she made notes, calculating figures, drafting a proposal. This was the work that made her feel valuable, purposeful. Managing Hartfield's finances had fallen to her 6 years ago, when her uncle's health began to fail, and she had discovered she possessed both aptitude and passion for it. While other young women practiced watercolours and needlework, Catherine studied crop yields and investment returns. Still at those dreary numbers, Catherine. She looked up to find her cousin Rosalind in the doorway, already dressed for the day in a gown of pale yellow muslin that made her look like captured sunlight. Rosalind's golden hair was arranged in elaborate curls, her violet eyes bright with the easy confidence of someone who had never doubted her place in the world. "Good morning, Rosalind," Catherine said, setting down her pen. "And they're not dreary. I think I've found a way to reduce our grain expenditure by nearly 20%. Rosalind wrinkled her perfect nose. "How wonderfully practical. Mamma is looking for you, by the way. Something about the menu for tonight's dinner party. She wants your opinion on the fish course." Catherine rose from the desk, smoothing the skirts of her simple brown morning dress. The fabric was good quality, but chosen for durability rather than beauty. The colour selected, because it didn't show dirt when she visited the tenant farms. Standing beside Rosalind was like standing beside a candle. Rosalind glowed, and Catherine simply existed. She had long ago accepted this reality. When her parents died of typhoid fever 14 years ago, her Uncle Thomas and Aunt Lavinia had taken her in, raised her alongside their own daughter with what Catherine supposed was adequate kindness. They had fed her, clothed her, educated her. But while Rosalind had been praised for her beauty, encouraged in her musical accomplishments, prepared for a brilliant match, Catherine had been useful. "The plain one," she'd once overheard a visitor say. Pity about the Hartfield girl. Her cousin got all the looks. Catherine had learned not to mind, or rather, she had learned to pretend not to mind, which amounted to nearly the same thing. She found her aunt in the morning room, surrounded by menus and seating charts, her face creased with the particular anxiety that preceded any social event. "Ah, Catherine, I need you to review these arrangements. Lord Bellingham is dining with us tonight, and everything must be perfect. Everything." "Lord Bellingham?" Catherine picked up one of the menus, scanning the proposed courses. "The Earl of Bellingham, dear. Do try to pay attention." Aunt Lavinia adjusted a vase of roses with trembling fingers. "He's taken the lease on Thornbridge Estate while considering its purchase. 32, unmarried, one of the wealthiest men in England." Lord Pembroke arranged the introduction. Apparently, Lord Bellingham expressed interest in meeting local landowners to discuss agricultural improvements. Catherine understood immediately. "And you hope he'll be interested in Rosalind?" "Well, naturally. She's the most beautiful girl in the county. Any man with eyes would be interested in Rosalind." Aunt Lavinia's tone suggested this was a simple fact of nature, like rain falling downward. or roses blooming in summer. Now, the fish course. Turbot or sole? Turbot, Catherine said. It's more substantial, and men generally prefer it. You'll want to seat Lord Bellingham between you and Rosalind, with a clear view of her when she performs after dinner. Yes, exactly. You're so practical, Catherine. What would we do without you? Aunt Lavinia patted her hand absently, already moving on to the next concern. Now, about the flowers for the table. Catherine spent the next hour helping orchestrate what was essentially an elaborate showcase for Rosalind. Every detail was designed to highlight her cousin's beauty and accomplishments. The blue silk gown that made Rosalind's eyes look like summer violets. The candlelight was positioned to create a flattering glow. The musical pieces selected to demonstrate her technical skill and delicate feeling. No one asked what Catherine would wear or where she would sit or what she might contribute to the evening. She was part of the stage machinery, not the performance. By late afternoon, Hartfield Manor had been transformed. Flowers filled every room, their scent almost overwhelming. The dining table gleamed with silver and crystal. Servants rushed about with final preparations, and Aunt Lavinia's anxiety had reached a fever pitch. Catherine retreated to her small chamber to dress. She owned 3 dinner gowns, all chosen for their modesty and practicality. Tonight she selected a dress of dark grey silk, high-necked and long-sleeved, with minimal ornamentation. It was appropriate, respectable, and utterly forgettable, which was precisely the point. She pinned her brown hair in a simple knot at the nape of her neck and regarded herself in the mirror with the detached assessment of someone examining a piece of furniture. Average height, average build, grey eyes that were neither large nor particularly expressive, a straight nose, a mouth that was perhaps too wide, a chin that was perhaps too strong. Not ugly precisely, simply unremarkable. The sort of face that people looked at and immediately forgot. She heard Rosalind's laughter echoing down the hallway and allowed herself one moment of something that might have been envy or might have been grief. Then she squared her shoulders, lifted her chin, and went downstairs to help ensure that everything ran perfectly for her cousin's trial. Lord Bellingham arrived precisely at 7, and Catherine's first glimpse of him was from the landing of the main staircase as he handed his coat to the butler. He was tall, taller than she'd expected, with dark hair that fell across his forehead, despite obvious attempts to tame it. His evening clothes were impeccably tailored, his posture that of a man accustomed to command. But it was his face that arrested her attention. Strong features, a mouth that looked as though it rarely smiled, and eyes of such startling blue-grey that even from this distance they seemed to see too much. Lord Bellingham, welcome to Hartfield Manor. Uncle Thomas emerged from his study, moving with the careful deliberation of a man whose health was failing, but whose pride remained intact. May I present my wife, Mrs. Hartfield, and our daughter, Miss Rosalind Hartfield. Catherine watched Rosalind curtsy with practiced grace, watched her cousin's beauty register in Lord Bellingham's expression, a slight widening of the eyes, a barely perceptible pause. It was the reaction Rosalind always inspired. Men looked at her and forgot to breathe. Charmed, Lord Bellingham said, his voice a deep baritone that seemed to resonate in Catherine's chest even from across the room. Thank you for your hospitality. And this is my niece, Miss Catherine Hartfield, Uncle Thomas added as Catherine descended the stairs. Catherine manages much of the estate business, quite a head for figures. Catherine curtsied, keeping her eyes lowered. My lord. When she glanced up, Lord Bellingham was studying her with an intensity that made her want to retreat back up the stairs. Most people looked past her, through her. His gaze seemed to actually see her, and it was deeply uncomfortable. Miss Hartfield, he said, inclining his head. Your uncle speaks very highly of your administrative capabilities. I confess I'm intrigued. Estate management is something of a passion of mine. Catherine is terribly practical, Aunt Lavinia interjected quickly, as though being practical were a polite way of saying hopelessly dull. But come, my lord, let me introduce you properly to Rosalind. She's been so looking forward to meeting you. Dinner proceeded exactly as Aunt Lavinia had orchestrated. Lord Bellingham sat between her and Rosalind, the candlelight catching the gold in Rosalind's hair and the perfect curve of her smile. Catherine sat further down the table between Colonel Morrison and Mr. Pemberton, both of whom were happy to discuss grain prices and crop rotation with her while largely ignoring her as a woman. She performed her role flawlessly, ensuring the servants moved efficiently, keeping conversation flowing at her end of the table, making certain her uncle didn't overexert himself. All while watching Lord Bellingham converse politely with Rosalind, his manner attentive if somewhat reserved. "Miss Hartfield," Colonel Morrison said, "what do you make of the new threshing machines? Worth the investment?" "For a property your size, absolutely," Catherine replied, dragging her attention back to the conversation. "The initial cost is steep, but the labour savings alone would justify it within 3 years. I can show you the calculations if you'd like." "Would you?" "My own steward is sceptical, but I'd value a second opinion." It was the sort of conversation Catherine excelled at. Practical, analytical, devoid of any need for charm or feminine wiles. She was explaining the mathematics of mechanized harvesting when she became aware of a presence beside her chair. Lord Bellingham stood there, having apparently extracted himself from Rosalind's company during the transition between courses. "Forgive the interruption, Colonel, but I couldn't help overhearing. Miss Hartfield, you're discussing threshing machines." "Yes, my lord. Colonel Morrison is considering modernizing his harvest operations. And you're familiar with the comparative costs and benefits." Something in his expression suggested genuine curiosity rather than condescension. "I've made a study of it. Hartfield adopted mechanical threshing 2 years ago, and I've tracked every expense and saving since then." "Remarkable." Lord Bellingham pulled out the chair beside her, the one vacated by Mr. Pemberton, who had moved to speak with Uncle Thomas. "Would you be willing to share your findings? I'm considering similar improvements at my own estates, but reliable data is surprisingly difficult to obtain." For the next 20 minutes, Catherine forgot to be self-conscious. They discussed machinery and yields, investment returns and labour management. Lord Bellingham asked intelligent questions and listened to her answers with focused attention. He didn't talk down to her or dismiss her expertise. He engaged with her ideas as though they had genuine value. "You've given me a great deal to consider," he said finally as dessert was being served. "Might I call on you tomorrow to continue this discussion? I'd very much like to see your documentation." Yes, of course, my lord, though surely." She glanced down the table toward Rosalind, who was watching them with a small furrow between her perfect brows. "Surely what, Miss Hartfield?" "Nothing, my lord. I'd be happy to share my records with you." After dinner, the gentlemen retired briefly for port while the ladies withdrew to the drawing room. Aunt Lavinia was vibrating with excitement. "Rosalind, dear, you were absolutely enchanting. Did you see how he looked at you during dinner? I'm certain he was captivated." Rosalind settled onto the sofa with her usual grace, but her expression was uncertain. "He was very polite, Mamma, but he seemed quite interested in Catherine's agricultural theories." "Oh, that. Well, men do like to discuss business occasionally, but now you'll perform, and he'll see your true accomplishments." Aunt Lavinia arranged the sheet music on the piano with trembling hands. "The Beethoven sonata, I think. It shows off your technique beautifully." When the gentlemen rejoined them, Rosalind moved to the instrument with the unconscious grace of someone who had never doubted her welcome anywhere. She was genuinely talented, Catherine had to admit. Her fingers moved over the keys with technical precision and interpretive sensitivity, coaxing beauty from the instrument that made the room fall silent with appreciation. Catherine watched Lord Bellingham, watching Rosalind. His expression was attentive, respectful, but she couldn't detect any particular enchantment. He looked like a man appreciating a skilled performance, not a man falling in love. When the final notes faded, everyone applauded. Lord Bellingham inclined his head. "Beautifully played, Miss Rosalind. You're clearly highly accomplished." "Thank you, my lord." Rosalind's smile was radiant. "Do you play?" "Poorly, and only under duress." The faintest smile touched his mouth. "I appreciate music far more than I can create it." He turned then, his gaze finding Catherine where she stood near the window. "Miss Catherine, do you play as well?" Every eye in the room swiveled toward her. Catherine felt heat rise to her cheeks. "No, my lord, I don't have the talent for it." "But you enjoy listening?" "Very much. My cousin plays beautifully." "She does indeed." He moved toward Catherine, navigating around furniture and guests with that same quiet command. "There's value in being an appreciative audience, wouldn't you say? Not everyone can create music, but fewer still can truly listen to it." It was such an unexpected thing to say that Catherine didn't know how to respond. She simply looked at him, this stranger who kept saying things that made her feel seen in ways she'd never experienced before. "You've given me much to think about this evening, Miss Hartfield," Lord Bellingham said quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "Thank you for an enlightening conversation." After he left, Aunt Lavinia could talk of nothing but the evening's success, how Lord Bellingham had clearly been taken with Rosalind, how a proposal might be imminent. Catherine helped clear away teacups and arrange for tomorrow's breakfast, performing her usual role of useful shadow. But that night, lying in her narrow bed, she found herself thinking about blue-grey eyes and the strange sensation of being listened to, being heard, being, for a few brief moments, more than simply useful. It meant nothing, of course. Lord Bellingham was being polite, showing interest in agricultural matters because that was his nature. Tomorrow, he would return to court Rosalind properly, and Catherine would fade back into her comfortable, necessary invisibility. That was how things worked. That was how they had always worked. She had no reason to think anything might change. The following morning brought a note delivered by Lord Bellingham's footman, requesting permission to call that afternoon to review Miss Catherine's agricultural records. Aunt Lavinia nearly swooned with excitement. "He's coming back! Already! Oh, Rosalind, you've made quite an impression." Rosalind, who was embroidering by the window, looked up with a small frown. "But Mamma, the note asks specifically for Catherine's records." "Well, yes, that's his excuse, dear. Men do like to appear businesslike. But surely he'll want to see you as well." Catherine, who was sorting correspondence at the writing desk, said nothing. She understood the situation perfectly. Lord Bellingham needed information for his estate planning, and she had that information. It was transactional, practical, exactly what she was good for. Still, she found herself taking more care with her appearance than usual that afternoon, selecting a dress of deep blue rather than her usual browns and greys. It was still practical, still modest, but the colour brought out the grey of her eyes slightly. Not that it mattered, she told herself firmly. Lord Bellingham wasn't coming to see her. He was coming to see data. He arrived promptly at 2, and Catherine met him in the estate office where she'd already laid out her ledgers and calculations. She'd spent the morning organising everything, creating additional summaries she thought might be useful. "Miss Hartfield." Lord Bellingham entered the room with the same quiet intensity she remembered from the previous evening. Today he wore riding clothes, his hair windswept as though he'd come directly from surveying land. "Thank you for making time for this discussion." "Of course, my lord. I have everything prepared. Shall we begin with the initial investment costs?" For 2 hours, they worked through the numbers together. Lord Bellingham asked incisive questions, challenged her assumptions, and offered insights from his own experience. Catherine found herself defending her conclusions, explaining her reasoning, growing more animated than she usually allowed herself to be. "You see here," she said, pointing to a column of figures, "the labour costs dropped by 37% in the first year alone, but more importantly, the quality of the grain improved because we could harvest at optimal times rather than waiting for sufficient manual labour." Fascinating. Lord Bellingham leaned over the ledger, close enough that she could smell soap and leather and something else, something masculine and distracting. "And the maintenance costs for the machinery?" "Higher than I initially projected, I'll admit, but still justified by the overall savings." She flipped to another page. "I've tracked every expense here." He studied the neat columns of her handwriting, the careful calculations, the thorough documentation. Then he looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. "Miss Hartfield, this is exceptional work, far more thorough than any analysis I've seen from professional estate managers." Catherine felt warmth flood her cheeks. "Thank you, my lord. I enjoy the work." "That's evident." He straightened, and she was struck again by his height, by the way he seemed to fill the space. "Your passion for it shows in every detail. May I ask a somewhat impertinent question?" "Of course." "How did you come to manage Hartfield's accounts? It's unusual for a young lady to take on such responsibilities." Catherine set down her pen carefully. "My uncle's health began failing 6 years ago. His steward was less than reliable. I offered to help with the record keeping and discovered I had both aptitude and interest. Over time, I took on more duties until I was essentially managing all the estate's financial affairs." "And your uncle trusts your judgment?" "I believe so. The estate has prospered under my management. We've reduced expenditures while improving yields. The tenants are better housed and better paid. The numbers speak for themselves." "They do indeed." Lord Bellingham moved to the window, gazing out over the gardens. "I've met many men who couldn't manage finances half so well. You have a rare gift, Miss Hartfield." "I'm simply practical, my lord." "No." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "You're intelligent, dedicated, and remarkably competent. Those qualities aren't the same as being merely practical." Catherine didn't know what to say to that. Compliments on her usefulness she understood and accepted, but this felt different, more personal somehow. Before she could formulate a response, Aunt Lavinia appeared in the doorway. "Lord Bellingham! Still discussing those tedious numbers. Surely you'd like some refreshment. And Rosalind is in the drawing room. She was just saying she hoped you might join us for tea." Catherine saw the invitation for what it was, a polite but firm redirection. Lord Bellingham had fulfilled his ostensible purpose for the visit. Now he should move on to its real purpose, courting Rosalind. To her surprise, Lord Bellingham hesitated. "Actually, Mrs. Hartfield, Miss Catherine and I were in the middle of an important discussion about—" "Which can surely wait," Aunt Lavinia interrupted smoothly. "You've been sequestered in this stuffy office for hours. Come, some tea and pleasant company will do you both good." There was no polite way to refuse. Catherine began gathering up the ledgers, but Lord Bellingham touched her arm lightly, the first physical contact between them, and it sent an unexpected jolt through her system. "Might I call again tomorrow?" he asked quietly. "There's more I'd like to discuss with you." "Of course, my lord, any time you wish." In the drawing room, Rosalind presided over the tea service with graceful competence, looking ethereal in a gown of pale pink. Lord Bellingham sat beside her as Aunt Lavinia directed, answered her questions politely, and appeared every inch the proper suitor. Catherine poured tea for her uncle and Mr. Pemberton, who had stopped by with documents requiring signatures, and tried not to watch the tableau across the room. This was right, she told herself. This was natural. Rosalind was beautiful, accomplished, everything a man like Lord Bellingham should want in a wife. Catherine's moment of attention had been an aberration, a brief detour into practical matters before the Earl returned to pursuing what he truly desired. Still, when Lord Bellingham took his leave an hour later, his eyes found Catherine's across the room. "Until tomorrow, Miss Hartfield. I look forward to continuing our conversation." "As do I, my lord." After he left, Aunt Lavinia clapped her hands together with delight. "Oh, he's smitten, absolutely smitten. Rosalind, my dear, you've captured an earl." Rosalind smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "He was very attentive, Mamma." "Attentive? He could barely look away from you." Aunt Lavinia was already planning wedding breakfasts in her mind, Catherine could tell. Catherine excused herself and returned to the estate office, to the comfortable world of numbers and problems she knew how to solve. Lord Bellingham would continue visiting, would continue courting Rosalind, and would eventually propose. That was how these things worked. The fact that her chest ached with something she refused to name was utterly irrelevant. Lord Bellingham did return the next day, and the day after that. Each time he spent at least an hour with Catherine discussing estate management, agricultural innovations, or investment strategy. Each time, Aunt Lavinia would eventually interrupt and redirect him toward Rosalind. The pattern established itself over the following 2 weeks. Edmund, for Catherine had learned his given name was Edmund Ashworth, though she would never presume to use it, divided his visits between practical discussions with Catherine and polite courtship of Rosalind. To any observer, his intentions were clear. Except they weren't, not entirely, because while Edmund sat properly in the drawing room, making conversation with Rosalind, while he admired her needlework and listened to her play the piano, while he did all the things a man courting a woman should do, his eyes kept finding Catherine. In the hallway as she passed, across the dinner table, through the window as he arrived. Catherine told herself she was imagining it, that she was pathetically constructing meaning from meaningless glances, that a man like Edmund Ashworth would never truly see her as anything other than a useful repository of information. Then came the afternoon. She discovered otherwise. She'd been working in the garden, not the ornamental gardens near the house where Rosalind often sat with her embroidery, but the practical kitchen garden behind the stables. The head gardener had asked her opinion on expanding the herb plots, and Catherine had been kneeling in the dirt, examining soil quality and drainage, when she heard footsteps approaching. Miss Hartfield. She looked up to find Edmund standing at the garden gate, still in his riding clothes, his horse tied nearby. He was staring at her with an expression of surprise that bordered on confusion. Lord Bellingham. Catherine scrambled to her feet, acutely aware of the dirt on her hands and the old apron covering her dress. I didn't know you were calling today. If you'd like to see Rosalind. I was actually hoping to speak with you about the tenant cottages, but I can return if you're... He gestured at the garden tools scattered around her. What are you doing? Assessing soil composition for expanded herb cultivation. She brushed uselessly at the dirt on her apron. It's not very ladylike, I know, but... It's fascinating, he interrupted. You garden. I help plan the kitchen gardens, yes. We grow much of our own produce and medicinal herbs. It's more economical than purchasing everything and ensures better quality. She stopped, feeling foolish. I'm sure this isn't interesting to you. On the contrary. Edmund moved closer, his gaze travelling over the neat rows of plants, the careful organisation of the space. Most ladies of my acquaintance wouldn't know a turnip from a radish, much less understand soil composition. Yet here you are, covered in dirt and discussing drainage with the head gardener. There was something in his voice she couldn't quite identify. Not mockery, certainly, but not simple curiosity either. I prefer things that grow quietly, she said, the words emerging before she could stop them. Things that don't demand attention but fulfill their purpose regardless. Edmund was very still. Is that how you see yourself? Catherine turned away, ostensibly to examine a rosemary plant, but really to escape the intensity of his gaze. I see myself as I am, my lord. Practical, useful, good at managing things that need managing. That's not an answer to my question. She didn't respond, couldn't respond, because the truth was too complicated and too painful. Yes, that was how she saw herself. And no, it wasn't enough, not really, but it was all she had. Edmund moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him despite the cool spring air. Miss Hartfield. Catherine. May I speak plainly? The use of her given name sent a shiver through her. Of course. I find myself in a peculiar position. I came to Sussex to evaluate property and escape London society for a time. I had no intention of courting anyone, let alone seriously considering marriage. But now... He paused, seeming to search for words. Now I find I cannot stop thinking about you. Catherine's breath caught. This couldn't be happening. Men didn't say such things to her. Men said such things to Rosalind. I think about our conversations, Edmund continued quietly. The way your eyes light up when you discuss estate improvements. Your passion for efficiency and innovation. The fact that you'd rather be in a kitchen garden than a drawing room and see no shame in getting dirt under your fingernails if it serves a purpose. My lord, I don't. I'm saying this poorly. He turned to face her fully, his blue-grey eyes intense. What I mean is that I've spent 2 weeks ostensibly courting your cousin, because that's what everyone expected. She's beautiful, accomplished, everything society says a man should want. But Catherine, he reached out, then seemed to think better of it, his hand dropping to his side. You're extraordinary, and I need to know if I'm imagining the possibility that you could. Catherine, where are you? Aunt Lavinia's voice cut through the garden like a blade. Lord Bellingham's horse is here and, oh! She appeared at the garden gate, taking in the scene with widening eyes. Catherine covered in dirt, Edmund standing far too close, the charged atmosphere between them. Lord Bellingham, Aunt Lavinia said, her voice carefully controlled. I didn't realize you were here. Surely if you wish to see the gardens, Rosalind would be happy to show you the ornamental beds near the house. Actually, Mrs. Hartfield, I came to discuss business with Miss Catherine. Edmund's tone was polite but firm. About the tenant cottages. Of course, how practical. Aunt Lavinia's smile was strained. But surely you've finished your business discussion by now, and you really must see what Rosalind has accomplished with her watercolours. She's been working on a series of botanical studies that are quite remarkable. Catherine saw Edmund's jaw tighten with frustration, but there was no polite way to refuse. Aunt Lavinia was herding them both toward the house with determined efficiency. Perhaps we might continue our discussion another time, Miss Catherine, Edmund said as they walked. Of course, my lord. But that evening, as Catherine was preparing for bed, her maid brought her a book with a bemused expression. This was left outside your door, miss, with a note. Catherine recognized the volume immediately, a treatise on modern agricultural techniques she'd mentioned wanting to read during one of their conversations. The note, in Edmund's bold handwriting, was brief. Miss Hartfield, I believe you mentioned interest in this volume. I hope you'll find it useful. Also, I meant what I said in the garden. Every word. E.A. Catherine sat on her bed holding the book, her heart racing. He'd meant it. He genuinely meant it. Edmund Ashworth, Earl of Bellingham, was interested in her. Not in Rosalind. In her. The realization was terrifying, because Catherine understood reality. She understood that she was the plain cousin, the useful one, the one men consulted about ledgers and crop rotations but never actually desired. Edmund was clearly confused, mistaking intellectual compatibility for romantic interest. Once he spent more time with Rosalind, once he saw them side by side and remembered what beauty actually looked like, he would realize his error, and Catherine would be left with the memory of this brief, shining moment when someone had looked at her and seen something worth wanting. Better not to hope at all than to hope and be disappointed. She put the book on her bedside table and climbed into bed, determined to forget the entire conversation. Tomorrow she would be practical, sensible Catherine again. She would encourage Edmund's courtship of Rosalind because that's what made sense. She would not think about the way he'd said her name, or the look in his eyes, or the words he'd started to say before Aunt Lavinia interrupted. She absolutely would not. But that night, she dreamed of gardens and dirt-covered hands, and a man who saw beauty in things that grew quietly. The next day brought chaos. Aunt Lavinia had decided to host a proper dinner party. 12 guests, a full menu, entertainment afterwards, all designed to showcase Rosalind and provide Edmund with ample opportunity to propose. Catherine was enlisted to help with every detail, while simultaneously being reminded, with increasing desperation, that she must not monopolize Lord Bellingham's attention. He comes here to see Rosalind, Aunt Lavinia said firmly, as Catherine reviewed the seating arrangement. Your little discussions about farming are all very well, but they're preventing him from properly courting her. Tonight, you will sit at the far end of the table and leave Lord Bellingham to appreciate your cousin properly. Yes, Aunt Lavinia. And do try to look presentable. Wear something that doesn't make you fade into the wallpaper. Catherine glanced down at her grey morning dress and suppressed a sigh. Every dress she owned was designed to help her fade into wallpaper. That was rather the point. The guests arrived at 7. Edmund was early, and Catherine watched from the upstairs landing as he handed his coat to the butler. He looked up as though sensing her presence, his eyes finding hers immediately. For a moment, the rest of the world seemed to blur away. Then Rosalind swept into the entrance hall in a gown of sapphire blue, and Edmund's attention, of necessity, turned to her. Rosalind looked like a jewel, the candlelight catching the gold in her hair, her smile warm and welcoming. Catherine retreated to her room to finish dressing. She'd chosen a gown of deep burgundy, one of her newer dresses and actually quite flattering, though she'd never admit to the small thrill of hope that Edmund might notice. She'd spent extra time on her hair, pinning it in a softer style than her usual severe knot. When she entered the drawing room, Edmund was standing by the fireplace in conversation with Colonel Morrison. His eyes tracked her movement across the room, a small smile touching his mouth, but before she could reach them, Aunt Lavinia intercepted. "Catherine, dear, would you check on the kitchen? I want to ensure everything is proceeding smoothly." It was a transparent excuse to keep her away from Edmund, but Catherine had no choice but to comply. She spent the next 20 minutes in the kitchen, returned to find everyone being called to dinner, and was promptly seated exactly where Aunt Lavinia had intended, at the far end of the table, between Mr. Pemberton and a young curate who blushed every time she spoke to him. Edmund sat beside Rosalind, of course, and Rosalind, aware that all eyes were on her, performed beautifully. She laughed at his comments, asked him questions about his estates, touched his arm lightly when making a point. She was charming, gracious, utterly captivating. Catherine forced herself to make conversation with Mr. Pemberton about grain prices, to smile at the curate's nervous jokes, to perform her role of useful, forgettable cousin. She did not watch Edmund and Rosalind. She absolutely did not notice when Rosalind leaned close to whisper something that made Edmund smile politely. She did not feel her heart crack just a little. After dinner, Rosalind played the piano again, a complicated piece by Mozart that demonstrated both her technical skill and her musical sensitivity. The room fell silent with appreciation. Even Catherine had to admit that her cousin was remarkable. Any man would be fortunate to marry her. When the performance ended, Edmund applauded with the others. But as everyone moved about the room, refreshing drinks and forming conversational groups, Edmund made his way directly to where Catherine stood by the window. "Miss Hartfield," he said quietly, "I feel as though I've barely spoken to you all evening. You've been appropriately attentive to your dinner companions, my lord, as you should be. I'd rather have been speaking with you about tenant cottage improvements." His voice held a note of frustration, "but I suspect your aunt orchestrated this evening to prevent precisely that." Catherine glanced across the room to where Aunt Lavinia was watching them with narrowed eyes. "She wishes to ensure you have the opportunity to appreciate Rosalind properly. I appreciate your cousin's accomplishments. She's clearly talented. She's beautiful," Catherine corrected, "and kind, and everything a wife should be." Edmund moved closer, lowering his voice. "Catherine, I need to speak with you. Privately. Tomorrow, perhaps. Without interruption." "I don't think that would be wise, my lord," Catherine said, though every fibre of her being wanted to say yes. "People will talk. And Rosalind is lovely, but she's not the woman I wish to know better." Edmund's intensity was almost painful to witness. "Catherine, please, give me 1 hour of your time. No chaperones, no interruptions, just an honest conversation." Before Catherine could respond, Rosalind herself appeared at Edmund's elbow, smiling her perfect smile. "Lord Bellingham, Mrs. Whitmore was just asking about your estate in Derbyshire. Would you tell us about it?" Edmund's jaw tightened with barely suppressed frustration, but breeding and courtesy won out. "Of course, Miss Rosalind." As he allowed himself to be led away, he glanced back at Catherine with an expression that made her chest ache. She watched him go, watched Rosalind claim his attention with effortless grace, and felt the familiar weight of inevitability settle over her shoulders. This was how it would end. Edmund would realize that whatever momentary interest he'd felt in her was just that, momentary. He would recognize that Rosalind was the appropriate choice, the beautiful choice, the choice everyone expected, and Catherine would return to being useful, practical, forgettable Catherine. It was better this way, she told herself. Better to accept reality than to nurture impossible hopes. But that night, when she finally escaped to her room, she found another note slipped under her door. Catherine, tomorrow at 2:00, I will be waiting in the orchard behind the East Gardens. If you come, I will know you're willing to hear what I have to say. If you don't, I will understand and will trouble you no further. But I hope you'll come. Edmund Catherine read the note 3 times, her hands trembling. He'd signed it with his given name, Edmund. Not Lord Bellingham, not EA, but Edmund, an intimacy that both terrified and thrilled her. She should refuse. She should protect herself from the inevitable disappointment. She should encourage him to focus on Rosalind, where his attention belonged. But when 2:00 came the following afternoon, Catherine found herself walking toward the orchard, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and dread. The orchard was in full spring bloom, white petals drifting through the air like snow. Edmund stood beneath the oldest apple tree, his back to her, as he stared out over the valley beyond. He'd dressed simply, no formal coat, just shirt sleeves and a waistcoat, as though he'd known they would need to be away from prying eyes. "You came," he said without turning around. "I shouldn't have." "But you did." He turned then, and the naked relief on his face stole her breath. "Thank you." Catherine wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the mild spring air. "Lord Bellingham! Edmund, please! When we're alone, call me Edmund." "That wouldn't be proper." "Nothing about this situation is proper." He moved closer, though he made no attempt to touch her. "Catherine, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Do you feel nothing for me? Is this entirely one-sided?" The question hung between them, heavy with importance. Catherine could lie, should lie. It would be kinder, cleaner, easier for them both. "I feel..." She stopped, trying to find words for something she'd never allowed herself to examine too closely. "I feel that you're confused, that you've mistaken intellectual compatibility for something deeper." "That's not an answer. It's the only answer that matters." She forced herself to meet his eyes. "Edmund, look at me. Really look at me. I'm not beautiful. I'm not accomplished in the ways that matter to society. I'm plain and practical and far too interested in ledgers and crop rotations. You've spent 2 weeks with Rosalind. You've seen what true beauty looks like. How can you possibly think that I want you?" He closed the distance between them in 2 strides, stopping just short of touching her. "Because I do, desperately, not despite your practicality, but because of it. Not in confusion, but with absolute clarity." "You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying." His voice dropped lower, more intimate. "I know that I've never been able to speak to anyone the way I speak to you. I know that your passion for estate management is more captivating than all of Rosalind's musical performances combined. I know that when you get excited about drainage systems, your entire face transforms, and I can't look away." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. "Stop. Why? Because I'm saying what you don't want to hear, or because you're afraid to believe it?" "Because it can't be true!" The words burst out of her, raw and painful. "Men don't. People don't. I'm not the one people want, Edmund. I'm the one people tolerate, the one who's useful until someone better comes along. I've accepted that. I've made peace with it. Don't ask me to hope for something that will only end in disappointment." Edmund stared at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Understanding, perhaps, or grief. "Who made you believe that?" he asked quietly. "Who taught you that being extraordinary meant you weren't worth wanting? I'm not extraordinary. I'm..." You manage an entire estate with more competence than most trained stewards. You've increased efficiency by nearly 40% in 6 years. You care for every tenant and servant as though they were family. You see problems others miss and solve them with intelligence and creativity. You read agricultural treatises for pleasure and discuss them with more insight than most university graduates. He paused, his eyes never leaving hers. Catherine, if you think any of that is merely useful, then you've been surrounded by fools. She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. No one had ever said such things to her. No one had ever seen her the way Edmund seemed to see her. I need to tell you something, Edmund continued, his voice gentling. Last week I spoke with your uncle. I asked his permission to court you. Catherine's heart stopped. What? I wanted to do this properly. To be honest about my intentions from the beginning. He grimaced slightly. Your uncle was skeptical. He asked why I would choose you when Rosalind was so much more suitable, so much more beautiful. Each word landed like a blow. Catherine closed her eyes, willing herself not to cry. I told him, Edmund said quietly, that you are substantial, that you have depth, intelligence, capability, that I cannot stop thinking about you. You told him I was useful, Catherine whispered, the old wound opening fresh and raw, that I would be good at managing your estates. No. Edmund's hand came up, cupping her cheek with unexpected gentleness. I told him you were everything I'd been looking for without knowing I was looking. But Catherine, I think you overheard that conversation. I think you were outside the study door. She jerked back from his touch, confirmation written across her face. You heard your uncle call you plain, Edmund continued, his voice aching. You heard him question my choice, and you've been carrying that ever since, haven't you? Believing that I see you as merely practical, as safe, as useful, but not desired. Because it's true. She wrapped her arms around herself again, trying to hold herself together. You said I was substantial, capable. Those aren't the words men use when they want someone, Edmund. Those are the words they use when they're being sensible. Those are the words I used because I was trying to convince your uncle, and I knew he would understand practical arguments better than emotional ones. Edmund stepped closer again, his presence overwhelming in its intensity. But if you want to know the real reason I chose you, Catherine, it's this. You make me feel, for the first time in years, I feel something beyond duty and responsibility. When I'm with you, I'm not the Earl of Bellingham managing estates and meeting expectations. I'm just Edmund, and Edmund wants you so desperately, it terrifies him. Catherine looked up at him, seeing the truth written in his eyes, in the tension of his jaw, in the way his hands trembled slightly at his sides. He meant it. God help her, he actually meant it. I don't know how to be wanted, she whispered. I don't know how to believe in this. Then let me teach you. Edmund's voice was soft but certain. Let me court you properly. Let me show you every day that you're not just useful or practical or substantial, though you are all those things. Let me prove that you're also desirable, fascinating, and absolutely essential to me. What about Rosalind? What about everyone's expectations? Rosalind deserves someone who will love her for herself, not someone settling because society says they should. And as for expectations, he smiled slightly, a hint of defiance in his expression. I've spent my life meeting other people's expectations. Perhaps it's time I pursued my own happiness instead. Catherine wanted to believe him. She wanted it with an intensity that frightened her. But years of being overlooked, of being the plain cousin, the useful one, the forgettable one, those years had built walls around her heart that couldn't be dismantled in a single conversation. I need time, she said finally. I need to think about this. Edmund nodded, though disappointment flickered across his face. Of course, I've overwhelmed you. Forgive me. He stepped back, giving her space. But Catherine, before you go, I need you to know something. When I look at you, I don't see plainness. I see grey eyes that turn silver when you're excited about something. I see the way you bite your lip when you're concentrating on a problem. I see competent hands and a sharp mind and a heart that cares deeply about everyone around you. That's what I see. That's what I want." Catherine fled. She ran through the orchard and back to the house, her mind reeling. In her room, she paced for an hour, trying to process what had just happened. Edmund wanted her. Edmund had asked permission to court her. Edmund saw her as something more than useful. It was impossible. It was terrifying. It was everything she'd never allowed herself to hope for, and she had no idea what to do about it. That evening at dinner, Aunt Lavinia announced that Lord Bellingham had sent a note saying he would be away for a few days on business in London. Rosalind looked relieved rather than disappointed, which Catherine found curious. But before she could consider what that might mean, Aunt Lavinia turned to her with narrowed eyes. "Catherine, has something happened to Lord Bellingham yesterday? He seemed rather distant during last evening's dinner party." "Nothing happened, Aunt Lavinia." Well, perhaps some time away will help clarify his intentions toward Rosalind." But Catherine knew Edmund's intentions had already been clarified. The question was whether she had the courage to accept them. The 3 days of Edmund's absence stretched like years. Catherine threw herself into work, reviewing accounts, meeting with tenants, planning improvements to the estate cottages. But no amount of busy work could silence the voice in her head that kept replaying Edmund's words. "When I look at you, I don't see plainness. You make me feel. You're absolutely essential to my happiness." On the evening of the 3rd day, Rosalind found Catherine in the estate office, surrounded by ledgers and correspondence. "May I come in?" Rosalind asked hesitantly. Catherine looked up, surprised. Her cousin rarely sought her out for private conversation. "Of course." Rosalind settled into the chair across from the desk, her perfect features creased with unusual uncertainty. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "All right. Is Lord Bellingham courting you?" The question hung in the air between them. Catherine could lie, but something in Rosalind's expression, more confused than hurt, made her hesitate. "I don't know," Catherine said finally. "He's expressed interest, but nothing has been formally established." "I thought so." Rosalind twisted her hands in her lap. "Catherine, I need to tell you something. I think Mama has been wrong about Lord Bellingham's intentions. He's been perfectly polite to me, but he's never looked at me the way a man looks at a woman he wants to marry." "Rosalind, no, let me finish. I've watched him these past 2 weeks. He's dutiful with me. He makes appropriate conversation and pays appropriate attention. But with you—" She paused, searching for words. "With you, he's alive. His whole face changes when you enter a room. He finds excuses to speak with you. He listens to everything you say as though it's the most important thing in the world." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. "He's being kind." "He's in love with you," Rosalind said simply. "And honestly, Catherine, I think you're in love with him too." The words struck Catherine like a physical blow. In love. Was that what this aching, terrifying feeling was? This constant awareness of Edmund's presence or absence? This desperate hope warring with crushing fear? "I can't be," Catherine whispered. "Rosalind, he could have you. He could have someone beautiful and accomplished and perfect. Why would he want—" "Because he's not an idiot." Rosalind's voice held an edge of frustration. "Catherine, do you know what it's like to be me? To have men look at me and see nothing but a pretty face? To have them assume I'm stupid or shallow simply because I'm pleasant to look at? Rosalind, Lord Bellingham is the first man in years who's actually asked me substantive questions, who's treated me like I might have thoughts beyond fashion and music. And do you know why? Because he was being polite while desperately trying to get back to talking to you." Rosalind leaned forward. "That's what I want, Catherine. I want someone who sees me the way Lord Bellingham sees you. Not my face, but me." Catherine stared at her cousin, seeing her clearly perhaps for the first time. Rosalind wasn't angry about Edmund's preference. She was envious of the way he saw Catherine. "You're not upset?" Catherine asked. I'm relieved, Rosalind admitted. Mama has been pushing this match so hard that I felt obligated to encourage it. But Catherine, I don't want to marry a man who wishes he was speaking to someone else, and Lord Bellingham wishes he was always speaking to you. Before Catherine could respond, Aunt Lavinia's voice echoed from downstairs. Girls, Lord Bellingham has returned. He's in the drawing room asking to speak with Catherine. Catherine and Rosalind exchanged glances. Then Rosalind smiled, genuinely smiled, and said, Go. And Catherine, be brave enough to accept what he's offering. Catherine descended the stairs with her heart pounding. Edmund stood in the drawing room, still in his travelling clothes, his expression set with determination. Aunt Lavinia hovered nearby, clearly confused about why he'd asked specifically for Catherine. Miss Hartfield, Edmund said formally, might I have a word with you, privately? Lord Bellingham, surely if you have something to discuss, the whole family should, Aunt Lavinia began. With respect, Mrs. Hartfield, this concerns Miss Catherine specifically. Edmund's tone was polite but firm. We can use the library if you prefer, with the door open for propriety. Aunt Lavinia looked as though she wanted to object, but Uncle Thomas appeared from his study and said mildly, Let them talk, my dear. I suspect it's important. In the library, with the door open as promised but positioned so they had some privacy, Edmund pulled a small box from his pocket. Catherine's breath caught. Before you say anything, Edmund said quickly, this isn't what you think. Not yet, anyway. He opened the box to reveal not a ring, but a delicate necklace, a silver chain with a pendant shaped like an apple blossom. I saw this in London and thought of you, of our conversation in the orchard. Catherine stared at the necklace, her throat tight with emotion. Edmund, I can't accept this. I know, not as things stand now, but I want you to have it anyway, because... He closed the box and set it on the table between them. Because I've made a decision. I've waited 3 days hoping you would come to a decision on your own, but I realize I've been unfair. I've asked you to believe in something you've never experienced before, so I'm going to show you instead. Show me what? What it means to be courted, properly courted, with clear intentions and public acknowledgement. He moved closer, his eyes intense. Catherine, I'm going to court you. Openly. I'm going to make certain everyone, your aunt, your cousin, the entire county, knows that you are the woman I want. And I'm going to prove to you, day by day, that you're not just useful or practical, but absolutely essential to me. Edmund, I know you're afraid. I know you've spent your life believing you're not enough. But I'm betting, hoping, that if I'm patient and persistent and honest, you'll eventually believe what I already know to be true. And what's that? That you're extraordinary, that you're exactly what I want, that I'm completely, helplessly in love with you. The words hung in the air between them, simple and devastating in their honesty. Catherine felt something crack open in her chest, all the years of being overlooked, all the walls she'd built to protect herself from hoping, all the armor she'd worn to survive being the plain cousin. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. Then we'll learn together. Edmund reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His touch was warm, solid, real. One day at a time, one conversation at a time, until you believe it as surely as I do. What if I can't? What if I'm too damaged by years of being... You're not damaged, you're cautious. There's a difference. He squeezed her hand gently. And Catherine, I'm a very patient man when it comes to things I truly want, and I want you. From the doorway came a pointed cough. Uncle Thomas stood there, looking between them with raised eyebrows. Lord Bellingham, am I to understand you're expressing romantic interest in my niece? Edmund didn't release Catherine's hand. Yes, sir. With your permission, I'd like to formally court Miss Catherine with the intention of marriage. And Rosalind, Your daughter is lovely and accomplished, but she's not the woman I wish to marry. Catherine is. Uncle Thomas studied them both for a long moment. Then, to Catherine's shock, he smiled. Well, it's about time someone had the sense to see what Catherine's worth. Permission granted, my lord. Though I suspect you'll have to win over my wife as well. I'm prepared for that challenge, sir. As Edmund left, with firm plans to call on Catherine the next day, Catherine stood in the library holding the closed box with the apple blossom necklace, her entire world tilted on its axis. Rosalind found her there minutes later. He asked to court you. Yes. And you said? I said I was afraid. Rosalind pulled Catherine into a sudden, fierce embrace. Then be afraid. But be brave anyway, because Catherine, someone is offering you exactly what you deserve. Don't let fear make you turn it away. That night, Catherine lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the apple blossom necklace on her bedside table catching moonlight. Edmund loved her. Edmund wanted to court her. Edmund saw her as essential, not just useful. It was terrifying. It was impossible. It was everything she'd never dared to dream. And perhaps, just perhaps, she was brave enough to accept it. The next morning, Aunt Lavinia cornered Catherine before breakfast, her face a mask of confusion and displeasure. Catherine, your uncle tells me Lord Bellingham has asked to court you. Surely there's been some misunderstanding. No misunderstanding, Aunt Lavinia. But Rosalind doesn't want him, Rosalind interjected, entering the breakfast room in time to hear the conversation. Mamma, Lord Bellingham and I would never suit. He wants someone who shares his interests in estate management and agricultural improvement. That's Catherine, not me. But you're so much more. Aunt Lavinia stopped herself, but the damage was done. More what, Mamma? More beautiful. Rosalind's voice was surprisingly firm. Beauty isn't everything. Lord Bellingham has seen something in Catherine that the rest of us have been too blind to notice. We should be happy for her. Aunt Lavinia looked between her daughter and niece, clearly struggling to adjust her expectations. Finally, she sighed. Well, I suppose an earl is an earl, regardless of which niece he chooses. We'll need to ensure you have proper clothing, Catherine. You can't be courted by Lord Bellingham in those drab dresses. It wasn't acceptance exactly, but it was a start. Edmund called that afternoon, and true to his word, he made his intentions abundantly clear. He brought flowers, not for the household, but specifically for Catherine. He asked her to walk with him in the gardens, with Rosalind as chaperone. He spoke to her, listened to her, looked at her as though she was the only person in the world worth seeing. And slowly, carefully, Catherine began to believe. Over the following weeks, Edmund courted her with determined patience. He invited her to tour his estate, Bellingham Park, showing her everything, the tenant farms, the homewood, the account books. He valued her opinions, implemented her suggestions, treated her as a partner in the management of his properties. You have excellent instincts, he said one afternoon, as they reviewed proposed improvements to his estate cottages. Better than my steward, if I'm honest. You're being kind. I'm being accurate. He set down the papers and turned to face her fully. Catherine, when are you going to stop assuming every compliment is an exaggeration? When they stop feeling impossible to believe? Edmund reached out, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Then I'll keep saying until they feel it's possible, every single day if necessary. But their path wasn't entirely smooth. At a dinner party hosted by the Pembertons, Catherine overheard two matrons discussing Edmund's courtship. Such an odd choice, one whispered, with Miss Rosalind right there, and he chooses the plain cousin. Perhaps he values competence over beauty, the other replied, though one would think an earl could have both. Catherine excused herself and fled to the garden, fighting tears. She'd thought she was growing stronger, more confident, but old wounds ran deep. Edmund found her there, sitting on a stone bench in the darkness. Catherine, What happened? She told him, hating how her voice shook. They're right, you know. You could have someone beautiful and competent. You don't have to settle for just being competent. Edmund sat beside her, his expression hardening. First, you are beautiful. Second, I'm not settling. I'm choosing exactly what I want. And third, he cupped her face gently, forcing her to meet his eyes. Anyone who thinks you're merely competent is willfully blind. You're remarkable, Catherine, and I will spend the rest of my life proving it to you, if necessary. Why? The question burst out of her. Why do you care so much? Why fight for me when it would be so much easier to choose someone the world already values? Because I don't want it easy. I want something real. His thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. I want someone who challenges me, who makes me think, who sees the world in ways I've never considered. I want someone who cares about things that matter, like tenant welfare and efficient crop rotation, and whether the estate workers have adequate housing. I want someone who would rather discuss drainage systems than the latest London fashions. That's practical, not romantic. It's both. He leaned closer, his breath warm against her skin. Catherine, I love your mind. But I also love the way you bite your lip when you're thinking. I love that you keep ink stains on your fingers from working with ledgers. I love that you're uncomfortable with compliments because you've never learned to expect them. I love everything about you, the practical and the impractical, the competent and the vulnerable. All of it. Edmund. Her voice broke on his name. May I kiss you? He asked softly. Not to prove anything or convince you of anything, just because I desperately want to. Catherine nodded, unable to speak. Edmund leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away, and pressed his lips to hers with infinite gentleness. It was nothing like she'd imagined kisses to be. There was no passion or urgency, just tender sweetness that made her chest ache. When he pulled back, he rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Catherine Hartfield, and someday you're going to believe it. You're letting one spiteful woman destroy what you and Lord Bellingham have built over months. You're so afraid of being hurt that you're throwing away something real. Rosalind gripped Catherine's shoulders. Did it ever occur to you that Lady Vivian came here precisely because she knows Lord Bellingham loves you, that she's threatened by what you have? She's not threatened by me. She's beautiful, sophisticated, and alone, Rosalind interrupted, while Lord Bellingham is in love with someone else. Catherine, beautiful women aren't used to being rejected. When Lord Bellingham chose you over her, it wounded her pride, so she came here to wound you back. Catherine sank onto her bed, exhausted. But what if she's right? What if he did settle for me? Then answer me this. In the 3 months he's been courting you, has he ever, even once, made you feel like a consolation prize? Catherine thought back over their time together. Edmund's patience with her fears, his genuine interest in her thoughts, the way he looked at her like she was the most fascinating person in the world, the tenderness in his kiss that night in the garden. No, she admitted quietly, never. Then maybe you should trust what he's shown you over 3 months, rather than what a spiteful woman said in 3 minutes. Rosalind sat beside her. Catherine, I've watched Lord Bellingham with you. I've seen how he lights up when you enter a room, how he listens to every word you say, how he defends you to people who question his choice. That's not settling, that's love. But I'm not. If you say you're not beautiful one more time, I'm going to scream, Rosalind said firmly. You're different from me, yes. We're different kinds of beautiful, and Lord Bellingham prefers your kind. Why is that so impossible to believe? Catherine had no answer. Over the next week, Edmund sent letters, long, heartfelt letters that Catherine read and reread, but couldn't bring herself to answer. He wrote about Vivian, explaining their brief, failed courtship with painful honesty. He wrote about Catherine, listing all the specific moments when he'd fallen more deeply in love with her. He wrote about his fears, his hopes, his absolute certainty that she was the only woman he wanted. But Catherine remained paralysed by doubt. Then Uncle Thomas fell seriously ill. It happened suddenly. A heart episode that left him bedridden and weak. Catherine immediately took over complete management of the estate, working 18-hour days to ensure everything continued smoothly. She met with tenants, reviewed accounts, made decisions about planting and repairs and investments. On the third day of her uncle's illness, Edmund appeared at Hartfield Manor. "I heard about your uncle," he said when Catherine met him in the entrance hall. "I came to help." "I don't need help," Catherine said automatically, her armour firmly in place. "I know you don't need it, but I'm offering it anyway." He held up a leather case. "I've brought documents from my own estate, examples of medical care contracts, insurance arrangements, emergency management protocols, things that might be useful given your uncle's condition." Catherine stared at him, this man who had every right to be angry with her for running away, for doubting him, for throwing his love back in his face. Instead, he'd come to help when her family needed it. "Why?" she whispered. "Because I love you, and because when someone you love is struggling, you show up. Even if they've pushed you away, even if they might reject your help, you show up anyway." Catherine's carefully constructed walls crumbled. She burst into tears. All the stress of the past week, all the fear about her uncle, all the grief over what she'd thrown away with Edmund, everything poured out in sobs she couldn't control. Edmund pulled her into his arms, holding her as she wept. He didn't speak, didn't try to fix anything, just held her with a steady, unshakable presence. When she finally calmed, he said quietly, "I need to tell you something about Vivian, something I should have told you before." Catherine pulled back slightly, wiping her eyes. "What?" "When I proposed to her, it wasn't because I loved her. It was because I was lonely and she was available, and I thought making a sensible match would be easier than risking my heart." He cupped her face gently. "She turned me down because she said I was boring, that I had no passion, that I treated courtship like a business transaction." "Edmund." She was right. With her, I was all those things, because I felt nothing. I was going through the motions of what I thought I should do, but my heart wasn't in it. His eyes held hers with devastating intensity. "But Catherine, with you, I'm terrified. I'm vulnerable. I'm desperate. I lie awake at night worrying that you'll never believe I love you. I compose speeches in my head trying to find the right words to convince you. I make a fool of myself constantly because being with you makes me feel so much that I forget to be controlled." "You don't make a fool of yourself," Catherine said. "I do. I absolutely do, because you've awakened something in me that Vivian never touched. Passion. Real, overwhelming, terrifying passion." He smiled slightly. "So yes, I proposed to Vivian, and thank God she said no, because it freed me to meet you, the woman I actually love, the woman who makes me feel alive." Catherine looked at him, really looked at him, at the shadows under his eyes that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well, at the tension in his jaw, at the raw hope and fear mingled in his expression. "I was afraid," she whispered. "I know. I'm still afraid. I know that too." He brushed a tear from her cheek. "But Catherine, being afraid doesn't mean you have to run. It means you have to decide whether what you're afraid of losing is worth more than what you're afraid of risking. What if I can't be enough for you? What if you already are?" He leaned his forehead against hers. "What if you've always been exactly enough, and it's just taken you time to believe it?" Catherine closed her eyes, letting his words sink in. She thought about the past 3 months, about Edmund's patience, his devotion, his unwavering certainty. She thought about how he'd made her feel seen, valued, cherished. She thought about how he'd shown up today, even after she'd pushed him away. "I love you," she said finally, the words breaking free from the place where she'd been holding them captive. "I've loved you for weeks, maybe months, and I've been too afraid to say it because once I said it, it would become real. And if it was real, I could lose it. You won't lose it, Edmund promised. Catherine, you won't lose me. I'm not going anywhere. Ever. How can you be so certain? Because I know what it feels like to settle. I know what it feels like to go through the motions without feeling anything. And this, he pulled her closer, his heart beating against hers. This is the opposite of settling. This is coming alive. This is coming home. Catherine looked up at him, seeing the truth written in every line of his face. And finally, she let herself believe. Yes, she said. Yes, what? Yes, I believe you. Yes, I trust this. Yes, I'll marry you if you still want me. He kissed her before she could finish, pouring months of longing and frustration and desperate love into the contact. This kiss was different from their gentle kiss in the garden. This was passion, need, the kind of overwhelming feeling that Vivian had accused him of never possessing. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Edmund rested his forehead against hers. I still want you, he said roughly. I will always want you. Only you. From the doorway came a pointed cough. Uncle Thomas's doctor stood there, looking amused. Miss Hartfield, your uncle is asking for you. He says he has something important to discuss. Catherine and Edmund made their way to Uncle Thomas's bedchamber, where the older man lay propped up on pillows, looking weak but alert. Catherine, he said. Lord Bellingham. Good, you're both here. Uncle, you should be resting. I'll rest when I'm dead, which hopefully won't be for a while yet. Uncle Thomas gestured for them to come closer. Catherine, I owe you an apology. When Lord Bellingham first asked to court you, I questioned his choice. I suggested Rosalind would be more suitable. I was a fool. Uncle, let me finish. I've watched you manage this estate for years. I've watched you sacrifice your own happiness to ensure everyone else's comfort. And I've watched Lord Bellingham court you with a devotion I haven't seen in decades. Uncle Thomas reached for Catherine's hand. You deserve this, child. You deserve to be chosen, to be loved, to be happy. Don't let fear or old wounds convince you otherwise. Catherine squeezed his hand, tears flowing again. Thank you. Uncle Thomas turned to Edmund. And you, my lord, I trust you understand what you're getting. Not just a competent estate manager, but a woman of remarkable intelligence, kindness, and strength. If you ever make her doubt her worth again, you'll answer to me. Edmund smiled. I won't, sir. I promise you that. The engagement was announced the following week, once Uncle Thomas had sufficiently recovered. The response was mixed. Some people expressed surprise that the Earl had chosen the plain cousin. Others remarked on the sensible match between two people who shared interests in estate management. But Catherine found she no longer cared what others thought. Edmund had taught her that being chosen by the right person mattered far more than being admired by everyone. The wedding was planned for autumn, giving Catherine time to help her uncle recover and ensure Hartfield's affairs were in order. Rosalind, true to her promise, was genuinely happy for them both. I'm glad it worked out, Rosalind told Catherine one afternoon as they reviewed wedding plans. And honestly, watching you and Lord Bellingham has taught me something important. What's that? That I don't want to be chosen for my face. I want to be chosen for me, whoever that is beyond the pretty exterior. Rosalind smiled. I've started helping more with the estate work. Did you know I actually enjoy it? I'm good with the tenants, especially the children. I've been teaching them to read. Rosalind, that's wonderful. It's given me purpose beyond waiting to be admired. Rosalind's expression turned thoughtful. There's a new vicar in the village, Mr. Davies. He's been helping with the children's lessons too. He's not particularly handsome, and he's certainly not wealthy, but he talks to me like I have a mind, like I'm more than just a pretty face. Do you like him? Rosalind blushed, the first time Catherine had ever seen her cousin look flustered. I think I might. Is that foolish? It's the opposite of foolish. Catherine hugged her cousin. It's choosing substance over surface, just like Edmund chose me. The week before the wedding, Edmund took Catherine to Bellingham Park to show her the rooms that would be hers. He'd had them redecorated based on conversations they'd had. Deep greens and warm woods, with a large desk positioned by the window overlooking the estate. "Your study," he said, looking at her face, "for managing our properties. Because, Catherine, I don't want you to give up your work when we marry. I want you to expand it. Bellingham needs your expertise as much as Hartfield does." Catherine ran her hand over the smooth wood of the desk, overcome. "You've given me everything." "No." Edmund pulled her into his arms. "You've given me everything. Purpose beyond duty, joy beyond obligation, love beyond fear." He kissed her softly. "You've taught me what it means to truly choose someone, not because they're suitable or convenient, but because they're essential." "I'm still afraid sometimes," Catherine admitted, "that I'll wake up and this will have been a dream. Then I'll spend every morning for the rest of our lives convincing you it's real." He smiled. "Starting with this." He pulled a ring from his pocket, not an ostentatious piece, but a simple gold band with a small diamond. "This was my grandmother's. She told me once that true love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone whose imperfections fit perfectly with yours. Someone who makes you want to be better while accepting exactly who you are." He slid the ring onto Catherine's finger. "Catherine Hartfield, you are my perfect imperfection. Will you marry me?" Catherine looked at the ring, then at Edmund's face, at the hope and love and absolute certainty shining in his eyes. And she realized that somewhere along the way, she'd stopped seeing herself through the lens of being plain, overlooked, merely useful. She'd started seeing herself the way Edmund saw her, capable and compassionate, intelligent and kind, worthy of being chosen, worthy of love. "Yes," she said, her voice steady and sure. "Yes, I'll marry you." The wedding took place on a perfect autumn day, with leaves turning gold and the air crisp with promise. Catherine wore a gown of deep emerald, the colour Edmund had chosen for her that first day at the Modiste, and carried a bouquet of late roses from Hartfield's garden. As she walked down the aisle on Uncle Thomas's arm, she saw Edmund waiting at the altar. His face when he saw her made every doubt, every fear, every moment of insecurity worth it. He looked at her like she was the sunrise, the answered prayer, the only woman in the world. "You're beautiful," he whispered when she reached him. "I know," Catherine whispered back, and meant it. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They spoke vows promising partnership, respect, love, all the things they'd built together over months of patient courtship. When the vicar pronounced them married, Edmund kissed her with such tender passion that several guests sighed audibly. Catherine kissed him back, pouring everything she felt into the contact. Gratitude, love, trust, hope. At the wedding breakfast, Uncle Thomas stood to give a toast. "I've known Catherine since she was 12 years old," he said, his voice still weak but warming with emotion. "I've watched her grow from a frightened orphan into a remarkable woman. For too long, I failed to see what was right in front of me, that Catherine's quiet strength and brilliant mind were gifts beyond measure." He raised his glass toward Edmund. "Lord Bellingham, thank you for having the wisdom to see what the rest of us missed. Thank you for choosing Catherine not despite who she is, but because of who she is. And Catherine," his eyes found hers across the room, "thank you for finally believing you're worthy of being chosen." Catherine blinked back tears as Edmund squeezed her hand under the table. Rosalind's toast came next. "To Catherine and Edmund, two people who taught me that being chosen isn't about being perfect, but about being perfect for each other. May your marriage be filled with estate management discussions, crop rotation debates, and occasional moments of actual romance." Everyone laughed. Edmund leaned close to Catherine's ear. "She's not wrong about the crop rotation debates. I certainly hope not. I have very strong opinions about spring planting. I know. It's one of the things I love most about you." As the celebration continued, Catherine found a quiet moment to step outside onto the terrace. The autumn sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Edmund approaching. "Escaping your own wedding?" he asked with a smile, just taking a moment to appreciate it. She leaned against the balustrade, looking out over Bellingham Park, her home now. "A year ago, I couldn't have imagined any of this. Being chosen, being loved, being someone's first choice instead of their practical fallback." Edmund moved to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "You were always my first choice. From the moment you told me you preferred things that grow quietly, I knew you were extraordinary. Even when I didn't believe it, especially then." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Catherine, loving you has taught me something important. It's not about finding someone who's already perfect. It's about finding someone who makes you want to be better while showing you that you're already enough." Catherine turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had seen past her plainness to the person beneath, who had chosen her not despite her ordinariness, but because he'd recognized it as anything but ordinary. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too. Always have, always will." They stood together in the fading light, two people who had found in each other exactly what they'd been seeking without knowing they were seeking it. Not perfection, but partnership. Not beauty, but truth. Not someone to complete them, but someone to complement them. From inside came the sound of music starting. The dancing would begin soon. But for this moment, Catherine and Edmund simply held each other, savouring the beginning of their shared life. "Ready to go back in?" Edmund asked eventually. Catherine smiled. "Ready to face a lifetime of estate management discussions and crop rotation debates? Ready to face anything, as long as I'm facing it with you." They walked back inside together, hand in hand, equal partners in all things. Behind them, the sun set over Bellingham Park, painting the world in gold. 2 years later, Catherine stood in the estate office at Bellingham Park, reviewing quarterly reports with satisfaction. The improvements she'd implemented had increased efficiency by nearly 50%, while simultaneously improving conditions for workers and tenants. The model they'd developed here was being studied by other estates across England. "Still working?" Edmund appeared in the doorway, their 6-month-old daughter balanced on his hip. "Just finishing the quarterly review." Catherine set down her pen and held out her arms for the baby. Little Margaret came to her with a gurgling laugh, her grey eyes, so like Catherine's, bright with infant joy. "She's been asking for you," Edmund said, settling into the chair beside Catherine's desk. "Or at least, I assume that's what all the fussing meant." Catherine cuddled their daughter close, breathing in her sweet baby scent. "Were you good for Papa?" She was an angel, unlike her mother who worked through lunch again. "I was almost finished." "You're always almost finished." But Edmund's tone was affectionate rather than critical. "Mrs. Davies brought you tea and sandwiches. They're on the side table." Catherine looked over to see the refreshments, still warm. "You're too good to me. I'm appropriately good to you. There's a difference." He reached over to brush a strand of hair from her face. "How are the numbers looking?" "Excellent. The new irrigation system is paying for itself even faster than projected, and the housing improvements have reduced worker illness by 30%, which reduces lost time and increases productivity." "Exactly. Good ethics make good business sense." Catherine shifted Margaret to her other arm. "I've been thinking about expanding the model to the Western tenancies. The initial investment would be substantial, but the long-term returns are already calculated in that file you think I haven't noticed on your desk," Edmund finished with a smile. "Show me after dinner." "You don't mind?" "Mind discussing estate improvements with my brilliant wife. It's literally my favourite activity." He leaned over to kiss her softly. "Well, second favourite." Catherine blushed, even after 2 years of marriage. "Edmund." What? I'm simply stating facts. He stood, stretching. Speaking of which, Rosalind and Mr. Davies are coming for dinner. She wanted to discuss the school project. She's doing remarkable work with those children. Catherine smiled, thinking of her cousin. Rosalind had married the vicar 6 months after Catherine's own wedding and had found genuine joy in work that used her natural warmth and patience. Who would have thought we'd both end up so happy? Anyone with eyes, Edmund said firmly. You both deserved happiness. You just needed the right people to recognize your worth. A knock at the door interrupted them. Uncle Thomas, much recovered from his illness, appeared with Aunt Lavinia beside him. I hope we're not interrupting, Uncle Thomas said. Never, Catherine assured them. Come in. We just wanted to see our great niece, Aunt Lavinia said, though her tone was far warmer than it had been in years past. Watching Catherine's happiness had softened her considerably. And to tell you that Colonel Morrison stopped by Hartfield today. He's implementing your cost-saving recommendations and wanted to thank you personally. That's wonderful! Catherine felt a glow of professional pride. His estate should see significant improvements within the year. Half the county is implementing your systems now, Uncle Thomas said, with obvious satisfaction. My niece, the agricultural revolutionary. Hardly revolutionary, just practical application of common sense. You always were too modest, Edmund said, sliding an arm around her waist. Your innovations are transforming how estates are managed across England. That's revolutionary, whether you want to admit it or not. Later that evening, after dinner with Rosalind and Mr. Davies, after discussing the school project and Rosalind's pregnancy, she was due in spring. After putting Margaret to bed, Catherine and Edmund sat in their private sitting room, reviewing the Western tenancy proposal. This is brilliant, Edmund said, scanning her calculations. We should present it to the board next month. You think they'll approve? I think they'd be idiots not to. He set the papers aside and pulled her close. Catherine, do you remember what you said to me once, about preferring things that grow quietly? In the garden, yes. When you first found me covered in dirt. I've been thinking about that, about how you saw yourself as something that grew quietly, without demanding attention. He tipped her chin up, so she had to meet his eyes. You're still growing, we both are, but you're no longer quiet about it. You're transforming estates, teaching other landowners, revolutionizing agricultural practices. You've become exactly what you always were, extraordinary. You're just no longer hiding it. Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. You taught me not to hide. No, I just gave you permission to be seen. You did the rest yourself. He kissed her forehead. I'm so proud of you. And I'm grateful for you, every day. She cuddled closer, feeling the steady beat of his heart. Edmund? Do you ever regret it? Choosing me over someone like Vivian? Someone more beautiful, more socially accomplished? It had been months since she'd asked such a question, but sometimes old doubts still surfaced. Edmund pulled back to look at her seriously. Catherine, I'm going to answer this one final time, and then we're never discussing it again. All right? She nodded. I don't regret choosing you. I never have. Not for 1 second. Because you're not the consolation prize. You're the greatest triumph of my life. Finding you, winning you, building this life with you, it's the best thing I've ever done. His eyes held hers with absolute certainty. And if you want to know the truth, I pity Vivian. She's still searching for excitement and adventure in all the wrong places, while I've found something infinitely better right here. Partnership, purpose, love, and excellent discussions about crop rotation, Catherine added, trying to lighten the moment. The best discussions about crop rotation, Edmund agreed solemnly. Then he smiled. Now, can we please retire this question permanently? Because I have much better things to do with my evening than repeatedly assuring you that you're the love of my life. Such as? Such as showing you. He pulled her to her feet and toward their bedchamber, his intent clear in his eyes. Catherine went willingly, her heart full. She'd spent so many years believing she was plain, overlooked, worthy only of being useful. Edmund had taught her that she was so much more, capable and beautiful, strong and soft, practical and passionate. She was Catherine Ashworth, Countess of Bellingham, estate manager, agricultural innovator, wife, mother. A woman who had learned that being chosen wasn't about being perfect. It was about being perfectly herself, and she was finally, completely, joyfully herself. As Edmund closed their chamber door behind them, Catherine sent one last thought toward her younger self, the frightened girl who had believed she would never be enough. You are enough, she thought. You always were. You just needed someone to help you see it. Then she turned to her husband, to the man who had seen her when no one else had looked, and let him show her, once again, exactly how much she was loved.